Hi, everybody. I'm Mike, and this is the Beard of Empathy. Welcome to DAMH Fools, the show where we talk about deconstruction and mental health. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, Rusty. Rusty, hey, how you? Oh, wait. Oh, Bob. Hi. Hi. And I didn't realize you were there too. Give me a second. Hold on. Just gotta do a thing here. Today, I'm joined by Bob, the Flockmeister. How you doing, Bob?
Hi, doing good. I don't think Rusty was ever a believer, so he didn't deconstruct. So you have to stick with me for that.
That is a typical part of deconstruction story is having to construct first. So let's start there with the story. Like we'll start with your religious background. What was your religious journey like before deconstruction?
I was born into a semi-Christian home. My mom was the church-going one, and my dad apparently, before my memory or before I was born, was attending church and involved, and something turned him off, and I'm not quite sure what it was, but and he wasn't antagonistic about it. He would just say, if you believe it, you believe it. If you don't, you don't. Didn't want to talk about it. So my mom was the kind of the one that got us up and got us to church and hoped that we would be influenced positively, I guess. So I was always in church. It was the Baptist General Conference, and we were the regional part. We were the Midwest Baptist Conference. So when they did all these youth programs and events that you would go to and listen to speakers, we heard Josh McDowell in person one time. It was just after he had come out with Evidence That Demands a Verdict. So he talked to us and stuff like that. So in back 20 years prior, it was the Swedish Baptist Church, but then they, eventually began, and they were, preaching and singing in Swedish. Before I came along, they switched to called it the Baptist General Conference, and it was in English, but the roots were Swedish. So a lot of Swedish names in the congregation of the older people. So
Grew up, family was Christian, but not exceptionally Christian. Your father didn't really
yeah,
want to talk about belief or not, but it was kind of go through the motions. It's part of community,
yeah.
that kind of thing. But you spent a lot more time in the church anyway?
Oh yeah, yeah. We'd usually go Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday mid service. There was Awanas, like maybe on Tuesday or in midweek somewhere. There you had Awana Club, which I just hated. So
What is a I'm not familiar with the term. What is a Wana club?
okay, Awana takes its name from a passage in Timothy, one of the Timothys. It says, "A workman not ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." So they took approved of God, a workman not ashamed. Okay. And so they made the phrase, approved workmen are not ashamed, AWANA.
Gotcha.
And it was about Bible memorization, but there was also physical games it started out with these physical games. And they had it's kind of a brilliant plan that they had. So down in the church basement, you had a big square taped out on the floor. And each side of the square was a color. So those were the four teams: yellow, blue, green, red. And then there was a circle of tape inside. That was the track. So if you're going to have like a relay race, the first person in line would come in, he'd start around, and then as he approached the next person, they would do a relay, and the first team to finish all the way through would win. And then there were other different variations. They had tug of war and weird stuff like that.
When you first started describing stuff in the basement with masking tape on the floor, I thought you were gonna say that the pastor would step into the circle and say, "The first rule of Awana Club is we don't talk about Awana Club." I was expecting kind of a Fight Club story. No, but
The then the next part of the program, they would have some kind of talk or movie. They had a lot of movies. They had a Moody Bible Institute science film. So this guy would have some animal or something, and the one was about the electric eel. They showed how it generated electricity or whatever. And then there was some biblical lesson that was connected to that. And it was in the 60s, so they maybe were 20 years old. I don't know. They weren't that old, but they looked really old.
That's saying something even in the 60s.
The goal, you had a book that you worked through, and they wanted you were supposed to memorize scripture. You had a scripture memory. And if you memorized the verse for that week, you got points or you got a thing. And you had a uniform with little patches and things on that you would earn by memorizing scripture and blah, blah, blah. My favorite story is during the race thing, at one point there was the older kids were like the team captains, the grade school kids. So they were like in high school. We were in grade school. And so I was getting stuck on his team. And for a while, I was the shortest kid in line. So I was all the way down at the short end. I'd be the last one to run, unless they did reverse order. So what he would do was, I was standing right in front of this door. It was the utility room. The furnace was in there. And so he would say, go in there. He'd stick me in there and shut the door. Now he was short, so he could run somebody else, because you had to run the same number of participants for every game. So it was a way for him to win, because that was a big deal for him. He was a jerk. I don't think he cared anything about the Bible or God or anything like that. He just liked to win. And it was funny because I was okay. I'd rather hide in the furnace room than run around the damn circle. So, it was kind of a symbiotic thing. It was okay. It was just silly.
Yeah, the young people, often it's not about the Bible or the religion for them. It's a social club. It's for them to get together with people that they enjoy spending time with and doing stuff. And sure, they do stuff. It's great. Sometimes they do really like good works, charitable stuff, going out doing, handing out foodstuffs and things like that. That, good social, pro-social stuff. But it's usually not really about the religious stuff. It's about the connection with the other people.
Yeah.
Or in this particular case, it's about winning the competitions in the relay race.
Yeah. So that we were Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday prayer, midweek service prayer meeting, especially when I was older. When I was really young, I don't think they had anything for kids back then. And then Awana. There was a lot of conferences and things that we could go to, and they would do projects and parties and activities for the kids, for the youth. It was a lot of fun. But it didn't connect to anything else in my life. I had friends at school, I had church friends and school friends, and unless I happened to go to school with a kid I knew from church, there were two separate worlds, really. And I was supposed to be witnessing, and I hated it. I felt self-conscious and stupid. And I think part of me, I think I never really connected emotionally. I kind of went through the motions, but deep down, I think I didn't really believe it. But it was what I was raised with. I'd always been around it, and I was told that it was true, so therefore it was true. But I didn't really feel much for it, except guilt when I wasn't living up to what I thought was the standard that I should have been trying to achieve.
The expectations were there, and that's what you were taught was supposed to be. It sounds like there wasn't a connection. It didn't make sense, or you didn't buy into it. You were never really convinced by it, but that was what everybody else was doing.
The way I put it was, At a very young age, I had like a ROM chip installed in my brain. And this is the truth. So any problem you try to solve, or anything that you're trying to figure out, you had to go through that. This is the truth. And it was very confusing because a lot of times it didn't help and it made things more difficult. And the where the story ends is I was in the right emotional state and I got the right amount of information, and I realized, oh, this there's nothing to this. There's nothing there. It's not the truth. And then I was fine. A lot of people have they when they realize that what they've believed their whole life isn't true, it isn't backed up by evidence, they're traumatized because they don't want, this is what they're used to. This is what they've always, they've built their life around. And so it's very traumatic. Josh Bowen, Paula Gia, people like that, it was very traumatic when they realized, hey, I can't believe this anymore. But that was my world. For me, it was a huge relief. It's like, oh my God, no, all this confusion, all this conflict, all this stuff. Now I understand why I was never comfortable with it. Why I never was really able to wholeheartedly indulge in it.
That part sounds to me like, yeah, you had the metaphorical ROM chip there, and like every bit of information that came
Yeah.
in gets compared to that for accuracy, right, I guess. But you just accepted it. Like, you just accepted that this is what it is because that's what you were taught to accept. But there was another protocol underneath the ROM going like, no. Like every time that God real thing got hit, there was something that said no, but it wasn't a big loud voice until you had a
Yeah.
moment of understanding, and then you felt the relief because the part that was saying no finally said, "You listen to me."
They hit on what you were supposed to witness. You're supposed to go tell your friends. You're supposed to preach the gospel. You're supposed to do this. And I never wanted to do it because I just felt like I was bothering people, invading with them. On a level, I guess I wasn't convinced myself, but I was. And so now when I think of all the times that I didn't witness to people, that was good because I would have been spreading bullshit and and messing them up. So I go back, I look back at my life and everything flip flops. Like, oh no, what you were doing good. You actually you were doing the best you can.
And this is actually a great example of the concept of cognitive dissonance. In the
Yeah.
debate space and the live chat space and all that stuff, we often will see opposition and people who are over religious, arguing from a stance of cognitive dissonance, where like they can't accept the argument that's coming at them, so they just kind of shut it down. It's painful for them. People going through deconstruction start the same way because we're told something, we're convinced something is true. We may not be convinced that there's a God, but the world around us is convinced, and so it seems like we should as well. So we convince ourselves that we should believe this. And then when that gets challenged because it's now deeply held belief, it's painful. It's the same part of the brain that lights up when we get punched in the face, like physical pain. Actually, part of that lights up and becomes active when we are told we are wrong about a deeply held belief. And it's an evolutionary response, right? It's more advantageous for us to believe that there's a dangerous thing in that bush than to believe that it's not a dangerous thing in that bush. If it's just a chicken in the bush that comes hopping out, no harm, no foul. Actually, no, it would be a foul. I got to change that. Can't be a chicken.
Right.
If a bunny rabbit comes out, no harm, no foul. If a mountain lion comes jumping out, well, that's a big deal. If I think that it's a mountain lion and the bunny comes out, I'm okay. If I think it's a bunny and the mountain lion comes out, I'm dead. So it's more advantageous for us to hold on to a belief until we're shown that it's safe to not be there. And some beliefs, like God, doesn't for some people doesn't ever feel safe to not believe that. So they feel this pain every time that belief is challenged. Sounds like for you, the cognitive dissonance was the other way. For most of your life, there was a part of you saying this isn't right until belief was challenged. And then the relief came because now you weren't in pain. The challenge was the evidence you needed to let go.
Yeah.
To
Yeah. Yeah.
that sounds like that was the impetus of the deconstruction. What event happened that challenged that belief?
Oh, that was, um, okay, so I retired. We we lived we lived in a university town. I worked at the university, and I don't drive, so I would walk to work. Well, the our rent was going it was, like a government subsidized housing, but we were paying market share. You could either be on some supplemental program or just pay the rent, so between my wife and I, we had enough, money, so we just paid the market share. Well, the place, changed hands, so there was kind of like a pressure for us to move, so we thought, "Well, let's move," and my wife says, "Listen, you retire," because I was old enough, "and I'll keep working," because she commuted to work, so we moved out of town. It would just be a little bit longer commute for her, and then, we'll live out you'll have your pension, and I'll have my salary, and, everything will be fine, and, she found the place, and, she took me out. She says, "Hey, I think you might like this place. It's an old farmhouse." It's like, I think she said it was originally built in 1849, so it's got charm, if you know what I'm saying.
I do.
So I'm walking around the property. I go around the back of the garage, and there's a chicken coop that somebody has built, and hence, ding.
Well,
Chicken.
you got a chicken coop.
So,
You gotta get chickens.
okay. So, yeah, that was the origin of that. So, being a Christian, and still, I still wanted to have fellowship with other Christians. I There was a little Bible church in the town 4 miles away, so we showed up there, and I got to know them, and I began to, be attend regularly out of habit, and, I was in a state where the sermons weren't really doing much for me because 'cause I'd heard it all before, it's like, "Yeah, that's what it says, but it doesn't really tend to work out that way. I've heard the same damn thing, all these promises, and that this'll cause this, and this'll fix that," and it never does. It's the same stuff. So, I didn't care much for that. But, there was a lot of stuff to do, and I cooked for a living, and so they had this nice little c it was a small, but it was like a commercial kitchen, and so they would do meals and things like that, and I got involved in that, so I could do the cooking and mess around in this fun little kitchen, and so that was my main focus. But I began to hear little things said that indicated to me that these people and I were at polar opposites politically. And I I couldn't figure I'd heard that. So 80% of evangelicals voted for Trump. This is the first administration. This is 2017. 80% of the evangelicals voted for Trump. And oh, that's weird. And now I was surrounded by them. I said, "Oh my God, these are the people I read about." And so I would try to engage them in conversation and see why they went that way. You know, what was their motivation? What were they trying to accomplish? What did they think they were gonna get out of it? And there my favorite example is a lady. She had a friend who was from Africa, but she was in the country, but she didn't have all her documentation in order. And she wanted us to pray that she didn't get deported. So I went to her and I said, yeah, I'm sorry about your friend. I'll pray for her. But, I think that when I didn't vote for the guy that you voted for, I did what I could to help your friend to keep from getting deported, because this guy will want to deport her, Stephen Miller, And she goes, oh, no, he's great. He's fine. She made no connection with the fact that Trump was a danger to her friend. But she was afraid that her friend would get deported. She didn't connect with Trump. And these conversations like this, I was like, these people they're clueless. They're disconnected. And I still didn't understand what was going on, but I was going to get away from these people. I didn't want to be around them anymore. So it was in the fall, and every year they did a big Thanksgiving dinner open to the entire community. They set up all the chairs in the big gym area and stuff like that. So I got involved. I volunteered to cook some of the food. It was mostly potluck, but we did the turkey roast, and we did a big batch of mashed potatoes, because the year before, people didn't bring enough mashed potatoes. So we'll do the mashed potatoes.
Well, you got to have enough potatoes.
So that was at the end of November. That was coming up. Well, in the meantime, I needed to replace my phone. My wife got me a phone just like the one I had, but the carrier wouldn't take it. They said, no, it's too low tech. You got to get something that'll, I said, oh, just get a smartphone. I got on Cricket, which is my carrier, and they're fine. I like them. So I got my first smartphone. Well, we didn't have Wi-Fi at the house, but I would take my computer to, like, if we went to McDonald's, or she was in recovery, she was in a rehab facility for a while for a problem. So I would go in there to visit her, but I'd be on my computer and I was be watching Apologia, because I knew about Apologia because of a Facebook group that I had been in for a while. It was about dinosaurs. And so
Yeah, you got one on your lap.
somebody posted
Sub Rusty.
Yeah. And so somebody posted Apologia video when he was like debunking some young earth creation thing that said that dinosaurs live with men, stuff like that. So that was my introduction. I said, I like this guy. So I tried to keep up with his, with his content. So now I had a smartphone, I had data, and I could watch all the Apologia I wanted. And once I got all cut up on that, I started to look at the stuff, the suggested videos. And I had 3 days. I was binging atheist content, listening to the arguments, listening to the evidence. After about 3 days, I had all the information I needed. Now, my emotional state was a lot in line with my intellectual state. Yeah, I don't like this because it doesn't make sense over here. I was done. So I kept going. I went to church a couple more times. I cooked the Thanksgiving dinner. Went to church the next Sunday morning, which is the first Sunday of December. And we typically do communion once a month for Sunday of the month. Well, the Sunday before, I was already out, but I was still wanting to fly under the radar. So I took communion, and I thought, oh, you're not supposed to do this. Oh, what do I care? Nothing's going to happen.
You were told that it was sacred your entire life, and like to then go, I don't believe this. The mental gymnastics at that point is like, oh, this is sacred. I'm no longer sacred, so it's wrong for me. Wait a minute. There's no God and no such thing as sacred. That's stupid thinking. Like,
Exactly. That's exactly. Because the Bible it's whoever eats or drinks in an unworthy manner brings condemnation upon himself. And it's a big deal. You better not. So that was my first reaction. And then it's like, oh no, this is silly.
Condemned by who? The person who doesn't exist?
Come get me. December, I just kind of gave the eye and waved it off. Get out of here. Like, oh, I was ready to go. My plan was to hang out until pastor came out and sit down and lay it out and be honest with him and tell him where I was and what I had discovered and what I didn't believe anymore. And he was in this long meeting that never ended. And so somebody offered me a ride home. So I took it. And then we did an email exchange where I did it that way. I said I wanted to do this in person, but we went back and forth on email.
How did the pastor react on that one?
That's really funny. I just saw him a couple of weeks ago because it was his wife's birthday, and my wife had a bag of gifts for his wife, and I needed to take them in and give them to her. I said, I'll go in there, no problem. So I went in there and I found her and handed her the things and then he saw me and he hugged me and was like, oh, geez. I like the guy. Oh, so in the email exchange, I did the first thing and he goes, well, it sounds like you're having a crisis, blah, blah, blah. And he sent all these, he had all these links to all these different apologists that, that would explain all the problems I had with slavery and misogyny and why the hell does God need bloodshed and stuff like that. So he had all that.
None of those apologists have good answers for the questions like, your
Oh,
problems with slavery.
yeah.
I have major problems with slavery. The Bible says it's okay. That I can't
Yeah, exactly.
I can't square that circle.
I was going back. I've still got all those emails and all that stuff. When I was going back and I was rereading and looking at it, and I was looking at the links. In a couple places, it was the URL, and in the URL it said RZIM. You know what that is?
No,
Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. And when I was reading it, that was just before the big scandal broke. When I was reading it again, he had this big scandal with the massage parlors and he's abusing these women, and then he died. So he was dead. But I look back and I go, oh gosh. I just felt so I was embarrassed for him for, who knew that. Yeah, but they loved Ravi Zacharias until he turned out to be a major fraud. I got a kind of a schadenfreude chuckle over the fact that he tried to get me to read Ravi Zacharias.
see, I thought you were gonna say something like Dinosaur Land or Hovind, something like that.
But no, I didn't recognize some of the other sources, but when I saw that RZIM, I go, oh shit. And then I would click on them and they were dead by the time, because it was after
After the scandal broke.
they had to hustle and shut things down and disassociate and all that. So yeah, those links were dead when I finally tried to use them.
I remember way back in my life, I made 2008 or 2009. I was working as a store detective in a not convenience store, major like retailer. And the inspector for the entire district happened to come in because he was looking at something that I'd found. And he started talking, and this is the very first time I heard any like apologetics like in my life.
Mhm.
And it would be years. Like I would listen to this guy talk about all this stuff, and it was like he was going on about microevolution versus macroevolution, and like all of the Kent Hovind bits. Like I swear, like he'd watched the Kent Hovind documentary so much he was just regurgitating it while he was sitting there with me. And like the entire time I was sitting there like, this is wrong. Like that's not right. But I didn't know much at the time, so I didn't argue
Mhm.
back. It wasn't until years later when I started into the uh, deconstruction content, atheist content, and started really learning about Kent Hovind and hearing his spiels and crap. It wasn't until then that I realized just how much this inspector had been listening to that kind of stuff. And man, I wish I could go back in time with what I know now.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked a bit about the deconstruction journey. Let's talk a little bit about the mental health journey. Looking back on things, what was your mental health like, at different points in life?
I think I've always had, self-image problems for a long time. I always, inadequacy.
There's an aspect of Christianity that builds in that insecurity, right? Like the whole basic
Yeah.
premise of original sin is you're not good enough.
Yeah, you can never just be comfortable and feel that, "Hey, I did pretty good." Well, because then that's pride and all this crap, but I always considered myself an underachiever, and I was because when I was in grade school and high school, I was just I was just so sharp. I never studied. I would hear the lecture, the class, and I would remember it. And when the test came, I just put down, so, "Oh, you told me, I know what it is," I never learned how to study. I never, I never just sit still and try to, I have to learn this. I didn't know what that was. I either knew it or I didn't, you know? If I was interested in something, I'd look it up and then learn about it. But there were all these expectations. So he's bright. He's gonna do something great. But I just, I didn't, I didn't thrive in academia. I could go for so long and then I would kind of burn out. I would just, I don't know. I don't know what it was. I was a very uncomfortable.
To be honest, sounds a lot like
Yeah,
ADHD to me.
yeah, yeah.
But they
Yeah,
wouldn't have
that
been
might,
diagnosing ADHD in the '60s. I think the DSM didn't
yeah,
add ADHD until the 3rd edition, which I think was late '70s, early '80s. I don't remember, but it would have been
yeah.
ADD then, and they were only starting to diagnose kids in the '80s with it, and then it became bigger in the '90s with the DSM-4 when they changed up the diagnostic criteria. So yeah, it would have been more difficult for you in the '60s with that kind of thing. Being smart is probably typical of ADHD more than the opposite. Like a lot of people say that or believe that ADHD is about intelligence. Has nothing to do with intelligence though. It's just about where we manage our attention
Mhm.
and focus. Now, I've found a lot of people are very intelligent with ADHD, but they get poor grades because they don't do the work, right? I didn't. I was diagnosed when I was 15, which means I've had it my entire life. I failed my first 2 years of high school
Mhm.
because I didn't do the homework. It wasn't because I wasn't smart enough. I went on to get a master's degree, so I think I might be smart enough. I still think I'm an idiot most of the time, but
Mhm.
I must be smart enough to at least get a master's degree. But the ADHD often has me second guessing myself because I developed those patterns. I'm smart enough, but I don't have the confidence because I've been wrong enough. I've failed enough.
Yeah, I did all right in high school. I started college, well, actually, I went to community college, and I was doing okay, and then I kinda burned out there. And then in '80, I went back to the university, and I start out okay, but I just kinda burn out. I just didn't wanna do it anymore. And then in '92, I worked for the university, and you could take, so many semester hours. I think if you're full-time, I think you could take 4 semester hours for free, you know, for that for each semester. So I started out part-time, so I could do 3 hours, with some classes for 3 hours. So I did a couple classes, and I was doing okay. Then I went full-time, and I was trying to work on my degree. Um, I was doing theater, I was going to try to do theater with a French minor because I took high school in French. Actually, it started in 7th grade because I went to the university lab school, and my classmates had started learning French in like 2nd grade, just a little sampling of it. And so then by 7th grade, you were in what would be like high school French year 1 in 7th grade. And so they were all there. They had a little, they had more background in French, but I picked up right. I was up equal with them, even just starting it in 7th grade. So
Picked up the language pretty quick.
yeah, I really, yeah. Again, I can still. It's a little rough, but I can understand some of it, and I can sort of fake my way through it. I could read if I could take a book and if I need a dictionary, to look up a word I don't know, but I could read it.
I
Yeah.
when I was in, I think it was 6th grade, early '90s, I was in the what they had the back-to-back program. I had a foreign exchange student came to stay with us, and then we went over to France and stayed with them
Oh yeah.
as a school year thing. So I learned some French then, but I can't remember much of it now. Mm,
Yeah. No, I
like,
see.
parsley for you,
Yeah.
Frank says? That's what my dad's favorite joke about French. "Parsley for you," Frank says. So, parlez-vous français?
Oh, parlez-vous. Okay, parlez-vous. Parlez-vous français. Yeah. And they gave us these records and little dialogues, and you were supposed to listen and imitate, repeat it. And I wanted to nail that accent down. And I remember my mouth hurting because you have to make different sounds and you have to
Mhm.
put make different shapes in your mouth. And it really, it would hurt a little bit, until you develop the muscles and the coordination and whatever. But I just wanted that. I just wanted to have that, because I hated bad accents. So, and then I did a lot of theater and stuff. So I'm interested in doing different characters and voices and things like that.
Around the time, I think you said 2017, 2018, when around deconstruction time, like, what was mental health like then?
Oh, I think I was in a good place. I'd retired. Life was pretty, pretty relaxed. I had a lot to do. I was building. I improved the chicken coop, and I built a run. Usually, you put the run right against the front of the chicken coop, and then you have a door, and they open, and they go into the run. Well, there was a concrete slab in front of the chicken coop, and then there was a propane tank, and then I could have open ground with the run. So I had to make like this tunnel, like this long uh, wire enclosed cage. So when you open the door, they came out and they went down the tunnel and then they were in the run. So I had different problems to solve. And I bought the poles and the fencing and all that. And that was a fun thing to do. And I made different little improvements on the coop. It was kind of something that somebody put up. They did a pretty good job, but the, uh, the roof was, it's all made out of particle board, like, uh, you know, underlayment, the stuff you put on. So it's made out of that. Well, the roof was disintegrating because it was just this particle board that had been rained on for a number of years. So a friend of my son's came out and, we put a new roof on one day. That was really, really fun. That one was I couldn't do that myself, but I I kind of masterminded it, figured out the placement of the rafters. Yeah, I just had lot lot of fun stuff to do. Just a lot of trees with dead branches. I'd get the branches down and burn them up, and then we had these storms that knocked big stuff out, so we drag them over and saw them up and burn them. We were just constantly having campfires because we had all this wood to get rid of. I got a bunch now that we had a tree that went down in the back, this huge limb laid down. Well, part of it died, but then this other part, there was enough bark underneath, and so the tree limb lays along the ground, and it has all this foliage, and the chickens love it. They hide under there. They go under there, and then they're not vulnerable to hawks and stuff.
So you had a lot of stuff to do. In the middle of it, you were watching Paula Gia, great channel. So you were watching a lot of that and then deconstructed in 3 days,
Yeah.
record time, speed
Well,
running.
there was a buildup. Keep in mind, way back then, there was this part of me that didn't, that wasn't quite engaged with it.
Yeah.
So it was like, I'll give you an example. When I was young, I had a very strong sex drive, but I had no outlet. So, but, and then there's this guilt trip. I'm sorry. And I went back and forth. I got this point. So this is ridiculous because I did believe in evolution. I saw the sense of evolution. I said, well, okay, so you let us evolve this way. And now you got this book that says, no, you can't, and it doesn't say you can't, but the message you get from the higher ups says, no, you don't, that's bad and all this. And I got to a point and said, look, I don't know what the hell's going on, but I'm not going to worry about this anymore. I'll do what I want. I'll meet it's a need. It's like, don't eat food. Screw you. Thinking back on it, I think that was a part of, that was the very beginnings of deconstruction. You run into this irreconcilable situation, and then you just make a decision and say, I don't know, I don't understand what's going on. I don't know what you want. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to do it this way because it doesn't drive me crazy. I was kind of Pimo about things. Pimo and Pomo and all that.
No,
We come across that.
no.
It's a Jehovah's Witness thing. So you start out, you're PME, physically in, mentally in. And then you might go to PMO, physically in, mentally out. And then in the final state, and then you might be POME, which would be where you get kicked out for some infraction, but you wish you were back in. So you're mentally in, physically out. And then POMO is when the resolution, physically out, mentally out. So I was PMO about a lot of things. And you didn't discuss it with anybody at church or anything like that. You know what they'd say.
Yeah.
So
Peer pressure is a very powerful thing. When there's a very, very famous experiment done repeatedly where we'll get a bunch of Confederates. The experiment is done on one person, but there's like 5 or 6 people involved. The 5 or 6 people be gathered around. The subject is just standing in the middle of them. And the test is that they're shown a picture of 2 parallel lines. The lines are literally the same length, that they're labeled A and B. Now, the Confederates, all the people involved in, not in the Civil War, but the people who were involved in the experiment, they're all in on it, and they're directed to say that either A or B is the longer of the 2 lines. Whatever is decided on beforehand, like those were like A is the longer of the 2 lines. They are exactly the same length, but the people are supposed to say that A is the longer line. And the person who's the subject who's being evaluated, I think it's something like 95% of the time they will agree just because they don't want to be on the outside.
Yeah.
There is indications in some variations of the experiment. There's some indications that intelligence level, the higher a person's intelligence level, the more likely they are to actually dissent and say, no, this is wrong. But that peer pressure is very important. It will silence us. Again, the more intelligent we are, the more likely we are to dissent. It is so interesting to see how like group silences people, and not even on purpose.
You ever see any of the old Candid Camera episodes? They have this packed elevator, and they're all in on it, and they're all facing the back of the elevator. So the victim gets on, So he faces the back of the elevator, right? And then they start to do this thing where they, as a unit, they turn 90 degrees. So he turns.
People will follow the group.
Yeah.
There's another experiment. I love this experiment. I saw it on a TV show called Brain Games. They actually showed a variation of the experiment. But it starts out with two people standing in a park looking up into a tree. Both of them are just standing there, and they're the experimenters, because they're going to collect all the data. But they're standing there looking up in a tree, and eventually somebody, because they're going to be talking to each other, pointing up in the tree, somebody's going to come along and ask them what's going on, because somebody's just going to be curious enough, and they're going to be like, "There's a snake up in the tree. There's a snake up there. You see it? See the snake?" And the person will start looking. Now, the key to this experiment is there's no snake in the tree. Remember this. There's no snake in the tree. The experimenters just saying there's a snake in the tree, and they'll sit there and try and look, and they'll be pointing at where things are. And the bystander will start looking. And because he's being told over and over again that there's a snake, he's going to start seeing something. And when you got three people, one more person's going to join, and they're going to start looking too. And then somebody's going to say, "I see the snake. It's right there." And the other people are going to start seeing it, and then more people are going to join. And the experimenters then take a step back, and they start watching, and they start recording what's going on with the people. Eventually, I think the one on Brain Games, they had like 15 people or something like that standing at the bottom of this tree, all of them saying they could see this snake. There was no snake. But people gathered together will follow each other. It's a very, very studied psychological phenomenon. And peer pressure is incredibly powerful. I think that's one of the reasons why religion has such staying power. You know, if it weren't for the people in my life, the people who are important to me, my entire social group, they all believe this same thing. I'm wrong if I'm the one who's on the outside, if I'm dissenting, which is why so many people, when they do deconstruct, they leave the church. I mean, I know I've heard that Justin DZ still goes to the church that he was at from time to time, but he's also said he doesn't go every Sunday. He goes from time to time when there's an event or something like that, or just to visit people that he knows there, that he likes there. But again, even he doesn't go all the time. People step away from that group because it does become uncomfortable to be the person who's got the ideas that are completely opposite of everybody else.
If I was back in the town where I grew up and where the university is where I worked, my next to last church was a campus fellowship. And if I had a chance to attend a service, I would go ahead. I'd stop in, because I don't even know if nobody would know me. You know, they wouldn't have any expectation of me. And I don't know if because they had just changed pastors. I talked to him a couple times just before I left, so I don't even know if he's still there. But yeah, I would. But this one, I wouldn't go back there because they all know where I'm at. There's this one couple that I was wondering if they were still alive. They're really a lot older than me. And when I went back in to deliver that present for my wife to the pastor's wife, and I got dirty looks, just like, and it's like, "You're a racist." I could little things they said. I would be very surprised if they were. They they had problems with Obama. You know, he didn't fit in. He wasn't didn't know how to be a citizen. You know, that stuff. He's not so I gotta shut up.
It puts a warm feeling in my chest when people who are completely opposite me tell me that they don't like me in some way, because I don't want people who are racist to like me. I really don't. Like, I understand racism there's actually a biological component to racism that comes out of othering, and it's a protective nature. We're hardwired for cooperation. So it's actually really difficult for us to see a human being and then harm that human being. But if we can convince ourselves that that person's not really human, it doesn't matter what they look like. So we do othering. We we call people by different types of names. We point out all the differences so that we can kind of highlight those differences to make them seem less human to ourselves. Uh, we all do it to some extent, partially because it's just the biological response. But we get to choose how we react to that. We might start doing the othering, but those of us who are more intellectually honest and empathetic will challenge our own beliefs on those things. We'll challenge our own biases and our own reactions to those things. But too often people don't do that. They lean into those things because that's what it feels like to be protected. It's what it helps them feel safe. It's not safe
Yeah.
and it's doing harm, but it makes them feel safe. I can empathize with the desire to feel safe. I cannot empathize with the need to hate.
Yeah, we're social, but there are, exceptions. There's like a limit. Okay, well, the, the people that look like me are okay, but here's the, and you kind of have to overcome that. You know what I keep thinking of is is the chimpanzees, male chimpanzees in their troop. They're loving fathers, and they're gentle, and if somebody starts to make trouble, he gets attacked and kicked out. But when the males go out on patrol and they run into a male that not of their troop, you know, out in they just catch him in the middle of nowhere. It's horrifying. You've heard about that at all? What they do?
No, I can imagine it's not pleasant.
They they ultimately kill him, but they torture him horribly. They bite off extremities, genitalia, and just mutilate him, until he dies. So it's just so there's this, and I see parallels like in human behavior. In one context, they're fine, they're loving, they provide, they cooperate like that. But then, now we're in another context. He isn't one of us. He isn't a chimpanzee. Like, I don't know. I really think about that, and I see parallels in human behavior. Maybe not to that, but sometimes,
Similar basis.
you know,
Sometimes it's exactly the same.
yeah.
And we are very closely related. It's not a surprise that we have similar types of behaviors. Our brains are way more complicated, larger in comparison to the size of our body, and our social interactions are way more complicated. We have some of the most complicated social interactions of anything on the planet. Just the sheer variety of social interactions that we can do because of these things in our skulls. Like they're there for that. And that's how we've survived all of this, is by coming together. And we have to make people no longer human in order to act against them. And unfortunately, we do that. We've done that far too much in the past, to the point where it's so ingrained in some portions of our society that we're fighting against the institutionalized racism. And then there are others saying that institutionalized racism doesn't even exist. And unfortunately, I think that's a group of people who just like to think that they solved it in the 60s, right? Oh, we fixed all the racism issues in 63. We don't have any anymore. But that's the head in the sand kind of people, ostrich folk. They stick their head in the sand, ignore all the problems, and then pretend everything's okay. So, a little bit of a summary. You grew up in a household that was Christian, but not overly religious. Your father, permissive enough to say you can believe whatever you want to believe and not push it. Spent a lot of time in church, right? Because it was the social group, social thing to do. Had two separate groups. You got the church group and the school group growing up kind of thing, but you were embroiled in it, in the religion, grew up with it. Continued on until you retired, when you started questioning. Oh, you were always kind of questioning.
Yeah.
Something that didn't connect right, but wasn't actively questioning, right? Accepting the dogma that's put in front of you, but there's always a nagging little voice saying, like, that's not right, but not question that thing. Just a disconnect. until you started hearing things about, here's why it's wrong. And that's a big step. Led to deconstruction. And mental health in retirement seems to be pretty good. What are you doing in the atheist and deconstruction community these days?
I'm involved with recovering from religion. I signed up with them within days of deconstructing because I kept hearing about it, and I've been to 3 excursions. I'm going to go. That's the fall. I don't know if you know what it is. It's the fall getaway. It's like the weekend. They they avoided the word retreat because it was too churchy, so they call it the excursion. But it's a weekend thing with the speakers and activities and just hanging out and food and that. So I'm looking forward to that. I didn't think I would be a good fit as a helpline thing. And plus I want to do things, but I know that I always drop the ball. Not always, but I have to be very careful about committing because it's an emotional thing. Oh yeah, I really want to do this, but when I comes down to it, I've got other stuff to do. I do all the cooking and I keep house and stuff like that. So I've got a lot. I've got a lot of stuff to do, and I'm 70. I want to take a nap and we'll just so I don't see fitting all the training in. But at the excursion, I volunteered to work in the kitchen for the weekend, and I had to go through the volunteer. I had to do a volunteer interview, so I got a call from Anthony Magnabosco, and I said, "Well, this is what I want to do. I just want to work in the kitchen at the excursion." So I'm technically a volunteer, but kind of a half-ass, not really. So last week they had the cooking covered, but they needed somebody to do dishes. I said, "I'll do the dishes." So I just washed every dish. It was it was a commercial little thing where you load up the rack and you run it through and put it away. And I had so much fun, but I just did every meal that we had there. And I'm hoping to do it again this fall. So I'm technically a volunteer, but I'm kind of a special case. So I do that. I'm getting more and more in chat. I just came from there was the Friday hangout. So I it was still going when I left. So it was a Friday hangout, Sunday hangout, Monday night RFRX. I go to all that usually. I like to jump in on a nice chat and start harassing the victim.
Harassing the apologists who come into the chat or
Stuff like that. Yeah. So
I've had a really good time with this conversation. It's been a wonderful time talking to you, Bob. Unfortunately, didn't get to hear much from Rusty, but there's a little bit in there, commentary. I want to thank you again for joining me. And if anybody out there, if you made it this far in the video, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you guys in the next one.